Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for choosing to join us today. Welcome to Rest, Reflect, Renew, moving from post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth with Dr. Gail Parker. My name is Jen Dewey, and I'm with Denver Public Library. Again, thank you so much for taking time to be here to practice self-care and to learn from Dr. Parker and celebrate her new book. Before we get started, I just have a couple of, here. We have just a couple of housekeeping things today. Closed captioning is enabled. You can turn it on and off by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Everyone's muted for now, so I think we have a lot of people here, which is fabulous. We will be pausing throughout the program for Q&A, so you can put that in the chat. Feel free to tell us where you're tuning in from there too. We are recording, but we will not be capturing participant images, and we will post this to the Denver Public Library YouTube channel later. So if you'd like to rewatch it, it will be there. Please stay tuned till the end of the program. We are going to tell you a little bit about a giveaway that we are doing for Denver residents that includes a copy of Dr. Parker's new book. So more on that to come later. This program is brought to you in a joyful collaboration with Soul to Soul Sisters, a grassroots, faith-filled, racial justice nonprofit organization based right here in Denver. Soul to Soul Sisters work to transform Colorado and beyond through Black women-led programs focusing on Black women's health and healing, reparations, Black voter engagement, and ending anti-Black racism. You can read more about them on their website, which I will put in the chat momentarily, and learn more about their Sister Soul Search retreat, which is coming up for Black women. Again, we'll put that website in the chat in just a moment. Joining Dr. Parker today is our own Ozzy Alozium. Ozzy is the manager of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Denver Public Library and is a racial healing consultant for several organizations across the nation. Ozzy is a social work scholar and professor and is deeply committed to collective liberation and to healing. As a critical Black feminist, she prioritizes racial and gender equity in her teaching, scholarship, and activism. She uses this focus to amplify voices of marginalized communities that are left on the fringes of research, public policy, and global conversation. She has been the lead researcher and equity consultant for several projects over 4 countries, has presented at numerous conferences in various disciplines, has served as a UN Practicum Delegate for the United Nations Annual Commission on the Status of Women in 2019. Ozzy believes in engaging in critical research as a radical act of freedom. Presently, her research is centered around trauma-informed and culturally responsive community engagement, like this program, radical healing, and radical imagination. Ozzy is also a wonderful and inspiring colleague, and I am honored to turn the mic over to her. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And I actually will not be doing very much talking today. I'm going to be handing it over to Dr. Parker here momentarily. I want to properly introduce you all to her if you are not familiar with her and her wonderful scholarship and her wonderful work. Dr. Gail Parker is an author, psychologist, educator, certified yoga therapist, and a lifelong practitioner of yoga. She became president of the Black Yoga Teachers Alliance Board of Directors in 2020. Dr. Parker is also well known for her pioneering efforts to blend psychology, yoga, and meditation as effective self-care strategies that can enhance emotional balance and contribute to the overall health and well-being of practitioners. Dr. Parker has appeared as a psychologist expert on local and nationally syndicated talk shows, including numerous appearances on The Oprah Show. Her first book, Restorative Yoga for Ethnic and Race-Based Stress and Trauma, offers self-care strategies and invites everyone, not just those directly impacted, to explore the intersection of yoga, race, and ethnicity, and to consider the psychological impact of race-based stress and trauma on all of us. The companion book, Transforming Ethnic and Race-Based Traumatic Stress with Yoga, invites us to reimagine and engage in healing strategies for ethnic and racial stress and trauma that lead to post-traumatic growth. Some of you joined us earlier this year for the first conversation that we had with her about her book, in conversation with some other folks across the nation. And so we're very thrilled to bring her back today. I'm going to hand it over to her, and she will be spotlighted for you all to see. If there are questions that you have throughout the conversation or throughout the book talk, definitely pop them in the chat and I'll interject and share them with her so she can respond to them, because she wants to be as responsive to you all as possible. So without further ado, Dr. Gail Parker.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's morning here for me. I'm in California, but I'm assuming it's afternoon for many of you who are not in California. I'm very excited to be here. I'm excited to have you here. And I have to give a shout out to one of my oldest and closest friends who I see has joined us. There may be others of you that I know, but Elizabeth Ebner, who we went to college together, and we have maintained this friendship for a long time. So I just want to say hello to her. And those of you who are here that I know, I'm happy to see you again. And those of you who I'm learning about, who I'm getting to meet, welcome. Glad to be in your company. So before we start, what I'd like you to do, if you haven't already, is to just put in the chat what your name is, where you're from, where you are physically located in your space, the space you occupy. I'm in my dining room. And what is the material that your feet are resting on? My feet are resting on tiles. So if you would just put that in the chat so we can get an idea of who we're sharing space with, and I will, or somebody will. Ozzy, do you want to read some of the responses?
Yes, I definitely can.
Okay, thank you.
And my feet are actually in some fuzzy slippers because it's cold in my office.
Okay.
Someone says, Kim says, home office and feet are on carpet. Beverly Grant says, in my kitchen. Oh, you all are moving so fast. Feet are on tile. Erica in Maryland, I think, MD. Oh man, this is going so fast. Home office, feet resting on carpet. Tiffany, woman cave on cozy couch. Ooh, that sounds nice. One foot on the ground, one on the carpet.
Just read a couple more and then we'll get going.
Okay. Avis is in Greece, feet on marble floor in living room. Katharina, feet on couch, living room in Berlin, Germany. Wow. I don't know what time it is there. Bernasha, I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, is in Maryland, feet resting on an ottoman.
Nice. I have to say hello to Katerina also, who I've never met in person, but who we have been in communication via the internet. So welcome all the way from Germany. So again, as I said, I'm really excited to be sharing what I love with you. So I thought I would start by, I've got an outline here for myself to follow, and I'm going to read to you. So those of you who know me, my clients, when I was practicing as a psychologist, I would always read to them, and they would sort of roll their eyes, and but I like to do it, and so I get to do that for an hour today. Let me tell you why I wrote this book, Transforming Ethnic and Race-Based Traumatic Stress with Yoga. And oh, by the way, my publisher likes these long titles. So they say when you present a title, just describe what you're talking about. Don't say anything cute. So this is really what this book is about. In 2015, I closed my psychotherapy practice that I had been engaged in for over 40 years. And when I closed the practice, it gave me an opportunity to dive more deeply into using yoga, particularly restorative yoga, as a therapeutic healing modality. I was teaching in the medical school in Detroit at the time, first and second year medical students who wanted to learn how to use yoga as a therapeutic healing modality. They didn't want to learn how to teach it. They wanted to learn how to prescribe it to support emotional health and well-being and a sense of balance. And so that was one of the things that I was doing. Eventually, that morphed into an entire curriculum, not of my own making, but of the woman who created the curriculum. It morphed into an entire curriculum, and we were teaching in a local hospital. We were the only hospital-based yoga curriculum in the United States. And so I was able to do that for a number of years. I was teaching yoga teachers who wanted to learn to be yoga therapists, again, how to use yoga as a therapeutic healing modality for emotional balance, to reduce anxiety, stress, trauma, etc. Over this time, it began to occur to me, remember the year is 2015, and we were beginning to experience an overwhelming number of events of young Black people being murdered, unarmed people being murdered. And it was clear to me that young people particularly, and not to mention the families of these folks and friends and relatives, were really traumatized by the events that were occurring. And I thought, I think it's important for us to begin to acknowledge that racial and ethnic stress and trauma exist. They're real and they need to be addressed. And so in 2018, I gave a keynote presentation at the International Association of Yoga Therapists. And by invitation, I was invited to come in and offer that presentation. And a publisher approached me and asked me to write a book on the topic. So that was the first book, Restorative Yoga for Ethnic and Race-Based Stress and Trauma. The book was published last August, 2 months after George Floyd was murdered. And at the time, I wasn't sure, you never know. I think one of the risky things about making yourself vulnerable enough to share your thoughts, your ideas, your feelings is it's possible that people are not interested in what you have to share. So that's always the risk. And so I had no idea how any of this would be received, because in 2016, 17, 18, talking about race and ethnicity was, we were living in a culture of silence when it came to having these conversations. That has shifted, as you can see. So I wanted to begin to introduce the conversation in a way that would allow all people, not just people who are being directly impacted, but people who may either inadvertently or even purposefully be causing harm, so that we can begin to take a look at our own relationship to race and ethnicity, starting with ourselves, so that we can begin to heal whatever wounds that we may be carrying that need to be healed. So that was the purpose of the first book. Well, because the publishing of the first book coincided with George Floyd's murder, this book took off like wildfire, and it stayed in the top 100 sellers on Amazon for the better part of a year. In the meantime, I was offering lectures and doing workshops around this first book. And one of the questions that continually came up was, well, how do I do that? Meaning, the first book was intended to offer up ways to begin to study ourselves in relationship to issues of race and ethnicity, using yoga and the principles of yoga, the practices and principles of yoga as the frame for doing the investigation, for doing the self-study. Self-study, for those of you who may not be familiar with all of the practices of yoga, is one of the principles of a yogic lifestyle, a yogic practices, to begin to take a look within ourselves, to find out, exactly what's going on within us, and to become conscious of our thoughts, our feelings, our actions. So that was what framed this book. So one of the questions that people would ask is, well, how do I do that? Now, I thought I had answered that in the first book. So I didn't always have a ready answer because I don't tend to have a prescriptive approach to any of this work. I don't tell people what to do. This is the thing to do. This is how you must do this. That's not my approach. But I realized, I thought, you know what? My answers, like, well, you just have to do the practice, are not sufficient. That these were real questions and people really wanted to know. So I thought, well, I guess it's time to write more about, okay, how do I move into a self-study process when it comes to this issue of race and ethnicity? And so that's really what brought about the this particular book. It also happened that it coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic. My idea, I thought, you know, we need something more here. With the health disparities that we were becoming more and more aware of. And so I thought I'm going to read to you just the introduction, part of the introduction, which will give you an idea of where I was coming from. So it's on page 19 for those of you who have the book. The time for positive change is now. Ethnic and race-based traumatic stress is real. It is a worldwide phenomenon. Regardless of race and ethnicity, we are all impacted by its damaging effects, from those who are wounded to those who intentionally or unwittingly do the wounding. Othering, the habit of marginalizing or excluding those who do not share your same characteristics, has been historically associated with outbreaks of infectious disease. And we've seen that, haven't we? We've seen that, oh, wow, look at what's happening. During the COVID-19 global pandemic, we are seeing a worldwide uptick in xenophobia and racism. People of Asian descent are being shunned, stigmatized, and scapegoated. And there are reports that just as Asians and people of African descent are being discriminated against in the West, Black African nationals and African Americans have become targets of suspicion, distrust, and racism in parts of China. Then it goes on, I go on to talk about the health disparities that are occurring in the United States. There are reports that African Americans, Latinx, indigenous communities, and migrants already at risk due to educational, socioeconomic, and ongoing health disparities are being denied equal access to shelter, transportation, food, and medical services. The ongoing stress of racial discrimination is a factor that makes African Americans and other non-white communities even more vulnerable to the devastating impact of the global pandemic. Further, and I think this is really important, at least it is to me, there's a large body of evidence that shows that regardless of other factors, including socioeconomic status, race, and ethnicity, race and ethnicity remain significant predictors of lower quality and intensity of healthcare and diagnostic services delivered. In the United States, African American, Latinx, and Asian Americans are less likely to receive even routine medical procedures. And one of the contributing factors in the delivery of substandard healthcare treatment is the implicit and explicit ethnic and racial bias of the healthcare provider. To be clear, beyond other health-related factors, the racial prejudice of healthcare providers is a contributing factor in the health disparities in non-white populations. Now, interestingly, I was looking on Instagram this morning, and there was a whole, Diane Bondi, some of you may know her, so those of you who are in the yoga world, posted an article about the bias and discriminatory behaviors of healthcare providers toward non-white people. So this is a lot. this is a lot. And I thought that this is why, for me as a therapist, it's critically important that we as therapists, as teachers, as educators, as people who are interacting with others, need to be aware of our own hangups, our own racial and ethnic hangups that we bring with us to whatever it is we're offering. Not that we're necessarily meaning to do harm. I will assume that we're not. We're not trying to do harm. We don't mean to do harm. But without the awareness of a topic that is emotionally loaded, which in this culture, race and ethnicity are emotionally loaded topics. If we've never taken a deep dive and done our own inner work, then we are at risk of being harmful. So I don't know if anybody has any comments or reactions to what I'm saying so far, but if you do, you can put them in the chat. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. And if not, I will just continue on.
People are saying validating and so true. And as Dr. Parker said, if you would like to ask a question verbally or respond verbally, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Someone said, thank you for saying this.
So I think that, you know, the paradox here is that at the same time, we're seeing this global awakening to the violent behavior based on you know, racial prejudices, stereotyping people, et cetera. We're also seeing, and people are protesting. I mean, so 2020 was also a year of protests against this kind of behavior. At the same time, you're seeing an increase in xenophobia and racism. So that's kind of the paradox. So I'm thinking, let's shine a light. Let's shine a light on our own behavior so that we become part of the solution, not part of the problem. So shall I move on? Can I?
There are some other comments coming in. So
Okay.
maybe, let's see. Your comments made me think of the recent conversation about the new Omicron. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Omicron. Yeah.
Omicron.
Well, I read today, it doesn't matter. Omicron.
Okay, variant. How we now know it was discovered in Europe weeks before South African scientists found the variant, but the odd way it was mapped onto the African continent. So I appreciate your comments, Dr. Parker.
Well, again, I think that is an example of the biases that that people bring to a conversation, that the willingness to blame, you know, a country. That's the othering. That's when you're casting. When we other, what we're doing is we're casting people or countries in the role of the outsider. They don't share my same characteristics. So that's what I see happening here. It's that behavior. Very quick to blame something on someone other than yourself, for example. So we do it individually, but it also happens in community. One of the things I want to say is there's a lot of focus now in the social justice activist realm on dismantling racism and focusing on the systemic racism. This is my focus, and we need that, but this is my focus. Individuals make up the system. And I know that through individual personal transformation, we can change systems. So my approach is always to focus on our individual personal transformation, which, by the way, we're not doing alone or in a vacuum. You can't. Some of it you can, but we're doing that in community, so that when there is a collective awareness of the need for us to all do our own inner work, now we can have a greater impact. And that's my focus. And from my perspective, that is often a focus that is neglected. We tend to be more external in our awareness and in our focus on injustice, for example, and not as aware of or maybe as skilled at taking a look at our own internalized experiences of race, ethnicity. We live in a racialized world and we've all been impacted. Yeah, but we're not all having the same experience here. We all have a racial, a cultural, and ethnic identity, but everyone is not having the same experience. So that's a long way to answer a question about why would you blame Africa when in fact, as it turns out, the origin may have been in Europe. So, because it's other. So.
There's one other question, and then we'll let you move on to the next portion. Jessica Coleman says, I have a biracial nephew with a white mother. My question is, how do I navigate telling her she's harming him by saying things like, I don't understand, so I'm happy he has you to talk about these things?
That's a really good question. I know, and one I haven't heard before, by the way. I don't understand, so I'm happy he has you to talk about these things. That to me is another very subtle way of othering someone. I can't imagine what it's like to be you. See, because why? Because of race. So I'm glad he has someone of his own race that he, or someone who has similar racial characteristics that he can talk to. I think that's give me a minute. I don't know how I would respond to that other than to maybe as gently as you can ask the mother, explain to the mother that may not be the most skillful way to approach this, that the child needs to hear from the mother as well. And what you don't need to hear. Again, I wouldn't say it this way. I'm just telling you what I'm thinking right now. By the time we're done, maybe I will have thought of a good answer for you. But whenever you say, I can't imagine what it's like to be you, no matter how you say it, there are lots of different ways to say that. I can't imagine what it's like to be you. And you're trying maybe to even be comforting. That is not comforting for someone to tell you, I can't imagine what it's like to be you. You don't have to imagine what it's like to be me. I want you to just be able to receive and hear, what I'm sharing with you. Mother to child, I don't know how old the child is. I think she needs to listen. She needs to listen to her child and not assume that you are a better model and teacher than she is. You both have something to offer. That's what I would share with her. That you both have something to offer. Yes, I can talk about, I know a little bit more about being Black than you do, but you're his mother. And he needs you. And he needs to know that you see him. So that would be my answer to that. So is it time to move on?
Yes, there's one other question that came in, but I can hold off on it. And
no, go ahead.
Okay. And I will also throw in a plug that we have a group of dedicated staff members that are part of a group called RADA, Read Aloud Dialogue Act, and they've got a lot of great resources for talking to your children about race that we can link in the chat as well.
Nice.
Someone says, how have you navigated Tanil? I think, I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. How have you navigated being a mom of a Black son in this racialized world? I struggle with projecting fear onto my son who's 15 years old. Just wondering how you've managed this issue.
So I wasn't planning on doing this right away, but this leads into the chapter. It's chapter 2. It's called Innocence. What I've done, I wasn't going to go into the chapters right away, but I'm going to do that right now. So the way I organized the book is I identified various yoga postures. And I thought about what these postures represent. We embody, I'm not going to go to it right away, but I will to answer this question. We embody our stresses and traumas. Stress and trauma is not something that it's not cognitive. It's not something that you think up or think about. You actually have the experience of stress and trauma within your body. Traumatic stress is any stressful experience, any event that overwhelms your system so that you can't quite process or digest the experience. It's kind of like, I call it sort of like a dangling participle where it's out here somewhere and you can't fully integrate it into your being because it's too much, it's overwhelming. Race-based traumatic stress is defined as any race-related event that causes emotional pain that is memorable. In other words, it's one that you remember, you don't forget it. It's memorable, it's ongoing, it's cumulative, and it's recurrent, so that it's not something that happens once and then you're done with it. It goes on and on and on and on and on. It can be subtle, it can be more, we call those microaggressions. It can be a major event that occurs, but over time, and this is what happens when you are in a constant state of stress that eventually can become traumatic, you tune it out. We have all been under stress and traumatized for the past 2 years with this virus, on top of all of the other racial and ethnic stresses that we face. And so over time, you either numb out if you're not able to deal directly with the stress and the trauma that you experience. You either numb out or you act out. And we have seen a lot of that these past 2 years. Also, we see people just sort of being depressed, for example, feeling almost paralyzed, not knowing what to do, not wanting to do anything, or people acting out, misbehaving in all kinds of ways that are destructive and self-destructive and destructive to other people. We are a culture that is embedded in unhealed stress and trauma. And when you don't deal with your stress and trauma in healthy ways, it festers and it becomes worse. It becomes worse. But to decide to deal with stress and trauma is challenging because it can be painful. But the pain of healing is temporary. There's a story I like to tell about a passerby who's walking past a man who's sitting with his dog on the porch, and the dog is whimpering. And so the passerby says, "What's wrong with your dog? Why is he whimpering?" And the man says, "Well, he's laying on a nail." And the passerby says, "Laying on a nail? Well, why doesn't he get up?" And the man says, "Because it hurts even more when he does that." And that's sort of the way our stresses and traumas are. We bury them because they're painful and we don't know what else to do, which is why we don't recover. We just kind of hide them. We bury them and then they begin to fester and they either get worse. And as I said before, we either act out or we numb out. And when you numb out, what that means is that it's so common, you don't even know that you yourself are stressed. So, let's talk about innocence. And then I do want to talk also about post-traumatic growth. So we're talking about the trauma that we experience, the traumas that we've internalized, that we've ignored, that we may not even know were traumatic for us. I mean, I'm still just learning that some of the experiences I had were traumatic. They were more than stressful. They were traumatic, which is why I haven't been able to get over them. So the question was, how as a mother have I navigated the space, having raised a son who is now 40 years old, by the way. Some of it was pretty scary. A new mother, this is on page 38 in a chapter called Innocence, which I think is critically important for us to be paying attention to now. One of the things that happens when there is race-based stress and trauma is children lose their innocence early on. They are not given the benefit of the doubt. They are presumed to be more mature than they actually are and held to a higher standard than a white child might be, for example. And that is damaging. And it results in people growing up and thinking that somehow, whatever they've done, I don't know what I did, but I must have done something wrong. You internalize that and you carry that with you. So a new mother once asked me if I still saw my adult son as my baby. I said, no. I see him as the man that he is, but I also see his vulnerability and his innocence. I have always seen his innocence, and I always will. But like many parents who know that there is a double standard in the way he will be treated because of the color of his skin, his father and I have been harder on him than he sometimes deserved, as were our parents on us and their parents before them and their parents before them. This is how we pass on the legacy of childhood wounding based on our own unrecognized race-based traumatic stress. This is why it's important that we recognize our wounds so as not to pass them on from one generation to the next. Unacknowledged wounds fester and over time can become worse, especially if they lose their original content. The presumption of guilt begins early in childhood, robbing children of their innocence, causing them to become fearful, overly cautious, and in some cases rebellious. They're forced to grow up too soon. Being given the benefit of the doubt is an example of the presumption of innocence. Blaming the victim, the one who is actually hurt by racial insensitivity, ignorance, or violence, is how victimizers project their shame onto those they harm. So the answer to the question, how did I navigate that space? Well, sometimes I did it skillfully and sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I was harder on my son than he deserved. I remember listening to a lecture given by Ta-Nehisi Coates, who has written a lot about his own experiences with race. And one of the questions in the audience was, how do I teach my child to protect himself from authority figures who may be willing to harm him? And he said, don't hit your children. Don't hit your children. And the host said, well, what do you mean? And he said, I want my son. He said, my father could be physically aggressive with me when he thought I had done something wrong because he was afraid that if he wasn't aggressive, that it might do me more harm than good. In other words, let me be aggressive here so you don't have to face it in the outside world. So that's a thought process that is sometimes the result of racial harm that people have experienced. He said, I want my son to be as sensitive as he wants to be. And so we learn to navigate these spaces by managing our own fear, by the way, by managing our own fear that something horrible may happen to my child. It's not an unfounded fear, but you want to balance your fear of what may happen to your child with your love. I love this child. How can I be the most loving parent possible to this child? Not the most permissive, the most loving. What does my child need from me? And this sort of tags on to the answer to the other question about, what happens when a mother says, well, I'm glad you can deal with him because I don't fully know how. Good parenting involves being attuned. And it's not just parenting, it's in connection with other people. We want to be attuned to one another. That's different than being nurturing, for example. I can be nurturing and loving and kind, but if I'm not attuned to you, if I'm not able to step into your energy field and experience you for who you are, regardless of race or ethnicity, if I'm attuned to you, then I'm not going to do you harm. But in order to be attuned to you, I have to be attuned to my own self. I have to be attuned to myself. Why can't I relate to my child? Am I being too hard on my child? Were my parents too hard on me? It's these kinds of questions, and that exploration is what we want to do. So I hope that answers your question about how I navigated this space. I did ask my son, well, he was a grown man a couple of years ago. I said, did I ever teach you to be afraid of the police? He said, no, you didn't. He said, I said, well, help me out. What did I do? Because we lived in Detroit, which was a predominantly Black city. So we were in the majority. We were not minorities in a majority community. We were in the majority, which is a very different experience, by the way, to experience yourself as being a member of the global majority, which we are. And it was one of the reasons I wanted to raise him there in Detroit. And it was dangerous. City living can be. He said, no, you didn't. He said, what you taught me was how to connect with people. I said, well, what did I teach you? He said, you taught me how to connect with people. He said, I'm very aware of the danger that I may be in when I'm stopped by the police. He said, but what I've learned to do and what you taught me to do, and this is not to blame anyone who isn't doing this, by the way, what you taught me to do was make eye contact, to use what scientists would call my social engagement abilities, to make eye contact, to relate, to connect. And he said it has worked pretty well for me. He said, I know that harm could come to me, but I'm mindful of that. And I conduct myself in a way that I try to show up safe, is what he's saying. Now, again, this is not to blame anyone who isn't doing that. So I don't want that to be the takeaway. So what I'd like to do though now is, I don't know if you are prepared. I'd like to take you through a practice at this stage of the game. So what I'm going to do is screen share, and I'm going to show you how this book is structured and how to use it to support you in, for example, reclaiming any innocence you may have lost. And again, this is not just Black children who lose their innocence because they're forced to grow up too fast. There was a young white woman in a webinar I was giving who said that she lost her innocence when she was about 10 years old, when her, the story is in the book, when her girlfriend, who was of South Asian descent, invited her to her home. And she went, and she came home and she was telling her mother what a great time she had. And the mother said, well, did her house smell like curry? And this woman said, she said, I didn't know what curry was, but I knew that that it was an insult. My mother was being insulting. She said, and I lost my innocence in that moment when I realized my mother was prejudiced. So we also want to be mindful, again, of what are our children picking up from us? Children pick up in nonverbal ways. They're not just listening to your words. They're picking up on the nuance. They're picking up on the tone of voice. They're picking up on the meaning of what you're sharing with them. So, all right. So what I'm going to screen share, and I'm going to invite you. You can either, if you are prepared to get on a yoga mat and do this posture the way I'm going to share it with you, go for it. If not, sit in your chair and or wherever you are, and we'll do it that way. So let's see. How do I do it? I'm trying to make this big and I can't, I can't see the thing. All right.
I think if you hit play from start.
Well, I don't want to hit play from start. I don't want to play from start. I just want to make it bigger and I can't remember how to set up slideshow. Is that it? No, that's not
play
it.
from current slide.
I don't see it for some reason.
Here.
Play, oh, da-da. Thank you. Yeah, is that it? Okay, thanks. I usually do it from start. Thank you. All right, so this came to me the first time I did a workshop on race-based traumatic stress was in Los Angeles in, I think it was 2016. And it was an interesting experience. It was a racially mixed group of people. And I was really just teaching them about the concept of race-based traumatic stress and showing them how restorative yoga could be used to support calming the nervous system and to support restoring resilience and balance within a person who has been stressed and traumatized. And at the end, I was asking for feedback. And one of the participants said, it was she said, I really liked the workshop. She said, but you spent a lot of time giving us all of the physical benefits of the postures and you left out, she said, the most important part, the spiritual aspects of it. And I never forgot that. You know, it's one of those pieces of feedback that you get and you think, oh, I think that's right. But what does she mean? What is she talking about? I didn't have a chance to have a conversation with her about it afterwards and didn't remember her name. And the hosts of the workshop didn't know her. So I thought about it. I sat with it and sat with it. And then a few years ago, I ran into her at this conference where I gave the keynote where I was asked to write the book. And I ran up to her and I said, I've been thinking about you for a couple of years. You gave me this feedback. She said, oh my God, I was so afraid I said something wrong. I said, no, not at all. And what came to me was, as I sat and I looked at not looked at this picture, but child's pose, that's what this is called. I thought, I can attach meaning to each of these postures. If we embody our stress and trauma, then what better way to reclaim innocence if we have grown up feeling accused of being guilty than this posture? So that's what I have done with each of the postures in the book. You can use the postures however you want, but this is what I have done with them. So if you're going to practice doing the posture, now is a good time to, if you have a bolster, you can, which is what this illustration is laying across, you can come into your hands and knees and spread your knees, mat width apart, your toes are touching behind you, and then just fold across the bolster. If you're not doing it that way, you can sit in your chair and close your eyes and come to your breath. And just begin to observe the coolness of the breath on your nostrils as you inhale, and the warmth of your breath in your nostrils as you exhale. And just continue to focus your awareness on your breath. As you settle in to this posture, or settle into your chair, your seat, if you're not in the posture. And on your next inhale, just silently repeat to yourself, I am innocent. And on your exhale, silently repeat to yourself, I am free. Inhale, I am innocent. Exhale, I am free. And do that 3 more times. On your inhale, I am innocent. Exhale, I am free. And now on your next inhale, just silently repeat the word innocent. And on your exhale, repeat the word free. And just be aware of what comes up for you as you repeat these words and as you hold your body in this posture. And then preparing to bring your awareness back to the surface level of consciousness. Just take a deep inhale through your nose. Exhale through your mouth. Another deep inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth. And then when you're ready, if you're in the posture, bring yourself back up to seated. If you're seated already, just bring your awareness back to the computer screen. And if you were reading the book and doing the book, then there would be a journal prompt for you. So since we don't have journals with us, or really time for that right now, I'll just invite you to write in the chat, I feel innocent and free when. I feel innocent and free when I rest. I feel innocent and free when I'm writing. Innocent and free when I'm in my garden. I feel innocent and free when I blow bubbles. I feel innocent and free when I'm laughing. I feel innocent and free when I kick the fall leaves, when I'm with loved ones, when I'm at the beach, when I disconnect from technology, yay. I feel innocent and free in this space. When I wander to the ocean, when I have my morning stretch, when I'm painting. So this is a posture, a practice that can support us in reclaiming our innocence. When we are socialized, all of us, when we're socialized to behave in certain ways, we, as children, we sort of end up having to give up parts of ourselves because, because parts of ourselves don't appear to be socially acceptable to everybody. our parents primarily, so we lose aspects of self. As grown adult human beings, the work now is to regather those parts of self and to step more fully into who we are. There is not just one self that exists. We have multiple selves that we occupy. And it's important for us to be able to reclaim those aspects of self that we've given up. I'm going to read to you now. I'm going to read to you about post-traumatic growth, because I think it's really important. We've been immersed, as I said, we're a culture immersed in unhealed stress and trauma. And for the past couple of years, all of us have been living in trauma, with trauma, aware of it. We are aware of it. And there's a lot of focus on it, And I think now is a time for us to begin to, as I initially started this work, it was to help people understand there is such a thing as race-based stress and trauma. Now I'm saying, okay, now that we know that, and we've been in it and we feel it, there's also post-traumatic growth. So I'm going to read to you about post-traumatic growth. This is on page 123 for those of you who may have the book. So post-traumatic growth is defined as a person's ability to regroup after experiencing a traumatic event and to experience shifts in consciousness that result in positive transformational change. In other words, we begin to see ourselves differently. We begin to see a situation differently. It involves the ability to find the growth opportunity hidden in the stressful series of traumatic events that one experiences. How do I find the growth in loss of a loved one? How can that possibly be a growth experience? How do I find the growth in an experience of humiliation? How do I find the growth in the experience of being disillusioned, realizing, oh my God, things don't work the way I thought they did. Oh my God, you mean right doesn't always win out? I'm disoriented. How does it, how do I find the growth in that? That's the work. Post-traumatic growth occurs when you are able to find meaning in your pain and suffering and to emerge with a greater sense of purpose. It's different from resilience, which is the ability to bounce back from stress and trauma. We need that too. Post-traumatic growth refers to the ability to reconstruct or rebuild a meaningful, purposeful life after everything one previously believed falls apart. I think we have certainly been in that. I have been in that space for the past couple of years anyway. Whoa, things really are not working the way we thought they did or should. Occasionally, growth after trauma happens in a spontaneous, sudden moment of insight, an aha moment. But that's not usually the case. Typically, it doesn't happen without effort that involves deep inner reflection and soul searching. But at some point after experiencing trauma, it is possible to experience personal growth, enjoy better relationships, gain a greater appreciation for life in general, and have a spiritual awakening. Traumatic events change us. After trauma, we are no longer the person we were. I remember a client who was the lone survivor of a fatal car crash, who was severely injured and whose doctors were surprised that she survived. When she came for therapy, she said, "I've become a new girl, and I want you to help me get to know her." That awareness and her acceptance of the way she had been changed by her experience are examples of post-traumatic growth trying to happen, but it didn't happen overnight. And she had to be willing to heal from her trauma and make the necessary effort to grow. That's what this work is. This is a guide that offers tools for you to use that will support you in growing through your stresses and your traumas, instead of doing what we typically do because we don't know what else to do, instead of contracting around the trauma. You know what I mean? Like when you step on a nail, for example, it hurts, and your body automatically does this. We don't want to stay here. We don't want to stay in this state. We want to do practices that allow us to let go of the contraction, even though that's painful. But the pain of healing is temporary. It's temporary. That if that dog got up off that nail, yeah, it would hurt. Maybe even more than stepping on the nail did, but that's a temporary pain. Remaining on the nail is problematic. We don't want to remain on these nails of pain that we don't know what to do with. And so that's what this guide is for. It is a self-care guide, but as I said in the description of this presentation, self-care is community care. It really is. And my recommendation in using this book, by the way, is that you do it in community, that you do it with others, even just one other person, so that you can have a conversation and come to a deeper level of acceptance and understanding of who you are. So I've been doing all the talking. Any comments at this point? Because there's one more thing I want to share with you, but go ahead. If you have any comments, observations, questions.
And again, if you want to say something verbally, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you. Some comments: so happy to be in a space with others who prioritize their healing. Amber says they prioritize all of your words with their yoga teachers and training through yoga school. Leslie says loves the thought of self-care as community care, especially being a school psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
Erica said this is amazing, in all caps. I agree. I'm excited to read this book and do it with my partner because it'll help the both of us. Thank you for your healing words. They're helping me to understand myself and my experiences better.
Which also, in answer to the first question that came, how do I tell my sister-in-law, what do I do? Do one of these practices with her. You don't have to make a speech or a lecture. Nobody likes to be lectured to or taught lessons. But just engage, say, let's all do this together. And you don't have to make race the issue. See, that's part, it's not. It's our humanity that is the issue that we're trying to reclaim and step more fully into who we are, our authenticity. All right, so does that mean there are no more questions? Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Just words of gratitude for you so far.
All right, well, there's one more thing I want to do then. Let's see, we got time. Yeah, we have time. I, of course, had many more things that we were going to do. But so the subtitle of this is Rest, Reflect, Renew. So the rest is doing the restorative yoga. When we come into these states of deep rest, which restorative yoga, for those of you who may not be familiar, and a reminder for those of you who are, restorative yoga is a receptive form of yoga. It is not an active athletic form of yoga. It's a receptive form of yoga where we use props, bolsters, blankets, blocks, pillows to support the body in holding postures for extended periods of time so that you can drop into the relaxation response. The relaxation response is a real physiologic response. It is when it occurs, our blood pressure drops, heart rate slows, brain waves slow down, metabolism slows, and breathing becomes more efficient. That's where growth and healing and repair take place. So in a restorative practice, the entire practice, you're stimulating the part of your nervous system that slows everything down, the rest and digest system, the parasympathetic nervous system. And so when we've had a traumatic or stressful experience, we want to give the body has a way of healing itself. It has what we call remembered wellness. It wants to be well. It wants to have that sense of well-being. And when we give it the opportunity, by doing these practices, we come into that state of balance, which is where we want to be. So that's the rest aspect of it. The reflect aspect is where the affirmations come in. Affirmations are powerful and they are effective. I ran into a young man a couple of years ago. I was in a department store and this young man walks up to me, has on a suit and tie, looks very nice. He says, "Excuse me, what's your name?" I said, "Excuse me, do I know you?" He said, "My name is so-and-so." I said, "Oh, I remember you as a client, a former client." He said, "I just wanted to say hello." I said, "Oh my gosh, how are you?" Because when he was seeing me, and I said this to him, I said, "You know, when you were seeing me, you were really, really, really depressed. And what happened? What has changed for you?" He said, "Oh, you gave me an affirmation to say back then. And I've been saying it every day for years." And I said, "What was the affirmation?" I thought I knew, but just in case. He said, "You told me I didn't have to mean it. I didn't have to believe it. I just had to say it over and over and over again." He said, "And eventually I started believing it and meaning it. And I say it every single day of my life." He said, "What you told me was, I love and approve of myself." This was a young man who was suicidal, and I did not know what had happened to him because he suddenly quit coming to therapy. "I love and approve of myself." He said, "I say it every single day." We know that affirmations work. An affirmation is a positive declaration of something that you want to internalize and experience, right? So that's the reflection piece of the work. And then the renew part of the work is when you can journal. There is such a thing as therapeutic journal writing. And when you can write down what you're experiencing, it's not the events that occur that cause you stress that are as important as your response to the events. You know, what is my real response? What has happened here? When we can begin to put that in writing, there's a sense of renewal that occurs. I'm going to read you. I was going to help you do a practice with this, but I don't think we have time for the practice, but I'm going to read you what I think is important. This is a chapter on patience, which is another healing experience that we deserve to have. It's on page 111. It says, "Patience renews. An important practice to develop is the practice of self-renewal. People who are subjected to the ongoing, cumulative, and recurring emotional assaults of ethnic and race-based stress and trauma need to take time out to renew their body, energy, mind, emotions, and psyche. Without renewal, ongoing stress and trauma are overwhelming, taking a toll that leaves you feeling disheartened, drained of energy, and depleted. The COVID-19 global pandemic, coupled with the pandemic of racial violence and injustice, have had a negative impact socially, psychologically, and economically. We can no longer rely on our resilience alone to bounce back from adversity. We need something more. Resilience is the ability to spring back and keep going after hardship. And while it is essential to our health and well-being, springing back is not what we are being called to do right now. Collectively, we are in the midst of transformational change, a time when something new wants to be born, a revolution of the heart. I believe we are being called to birth a new consciousness of unconditional love, compassion, wisdom, mercy, and justice for all who are and all that is. This embryo in the womb of consciousness needs to be nurtured, loved, and held so it can grow and develop into its fullness. We don't want to give birth prematurely. We want to give this new consciousness every opportunity to develop fully so that when it is born, it is strong and healthy. Right now, we're being called on to be still, to self-reflect, and to renew. Now is the time to transform the harmful effects of ethnic and race-based traumatic stress that we have endured and that we have inflicted on others by cultivating a consciousness that recognizes our innate value, regardless of our skin color, facial features, hair texture, and unique cultural, racial, and ethnic identity. Self-renewal is rebirth, and like any birthing process, it is a process that takes time. It requires patience. We are in a season of renewal. During this period of gestation, while we are waiting to give birth to a new consciousness, a means to release old ways of thinking and being, ways that consume our time and deplete our energy is called for. Now is the time to let go of the stories we tell ourselves that hold us back, like, I'm not enough, I'm running out of time, I've done something wrong, or I'm not important, or I have to say yes because someone asked me to do something. Now is the time to be clear about who you are and what you value most in life, in yourself and in others. Now is the time to envision the life you want to live and the consciousness you want to occupy. It requires patience to dig deep into your soul, to uncover what wants to be birthed in you. Now is the time to rest, reflect, and renew. And if we had time, which we don't, then we could repeat the affirmations, that go along with that. So with that, we have a little bit of time left for questions and comments. And then Ozzy's good. Say it again.
I said there are a few questions that have come through.
Okay.
Question number one, how do you navigate or communicate with other POC who don't recognize or understand the decolonized, non-whitewashed version of yoga, especially, for example, since I'm East Asian and lighter skinned than other POC, but I'm disabled and have been actively practicing spirituality for almost 30 years now?
Read the question again.
Mm-hmm.
How do you navigate? Go ahead.
How do you navigate or communicate with other POC who don't recognize or understand the decolonized, non-whitewashed version of yoga? Especially, for example, since I'm East Asian and lighter skinned than other POC, but am disabled and have been actively practicing spirituality for almost 30 years now.
How do you communicate? You know what? I don't quite understand the question. I don't.
Jessica, do you want to maybe unmute and ask your question? Let's see.
Okay. Hello, I'm Jessica, she, her.
Hi, Jessica.
Yeah, I guess I just wonder like what my role or people's role is when we see harm being done, but the harm is being done by people who are perhaps darker skinned than I am or hold other marginalized identities that I don't. And especially, I mean, in the group, there are a lot of white passing people. And, what is the balance between, you don't want to like tone police and you don't want to be out of place, but also if you're passive, then that's also violent and wrong. So, it's like kind of like you're between a rock and a hard place. I don't know if that clarified the question a little bit.
A little bit. It's about, part of the stress that we're talking about is deciding in those instances, do I say something or don't I? I have lots of examples in both of my books about having those experiences. Is this something that I need to say to someone? And then the contemplation is this. I'm not going to tell you what to say, but the contemplation is this. What do I want to say? What's the outcome I'm trying to create? This is what's going on inside of you when you're trying to determine what I'm going to say, when I'm going to say it, and how I want to say it. So and I would say this to you, that I don't think it's always wrong to not say something. I mean, sometimes you determine, I'm not going to say anything about this. That's not always harmful. But a rule of thumb is, if I'm going to say something, is it true? Is it kind? Does it improve upon the silence? Is it necessary? So I'll give you that. Is it necessary? Is it true? Is it kind? And does it improve upon the silence? That's the first contemplation. Now, this doesn't take a long time to do, by the way. You don't have to spend, but it can. So I hope that's helpful. I mean, I think that, again, this is the inner work. This is the inner work.
Awesome. Another question came through. Oh, some good comments in response to that. But let me go back up to the question. Someone says, I'm a psychologist and certified yoga teacher. How would you facilitate an exercise like the one that we just did with individual and group therapy clients virtually?
The way we just did it. The way we just did it. I would want to, assuming that the people virtually, want to engage in this, but you would put them, for example, in a child's pose, and if you would choose that as an example of innocence, for example, and let's say you're theming your class around wanting people to reclaim their innocence, or to discover their innocence, then that's what you would do. I mean, it wouldn't be much different than what we did. I would, you'd put them in the posture and you'd leave them there long enough. I mean, it takes about 20 minutes for the relaxation response to set in. So you would leave them there long enough for that to occur. You would give them the affirmations, and then you can give them then you can have them do a journaling prompt. All of this, it's all outlined pretty clearly in the book. But you could use any one of these postures and any one of these themes to theme a class, and to then invite feedback. I always invite feedback after I've done one of these. And the feedback I invite is, choose one word that describes what you're experiencing now. And the reason I do that is, I used to try to get people to talk afterwards, but they couldn't. And because it pulls them out of their that place of, when you've transcended thought and even feeling, you have to start thinking again, and people don't want to do that. So I just pick a word. I hope that's helpful. But if you get the book, it'll be clear to you. If you get this book and read it, it will be very clear to you how you can use these postures. And you do it online, as I said, the way we did it.
Another question, when does your children's book come out to support our kiddos with two winky faces? Because they would love to give a book to their 11-year-old niece and 13-year-old brother. Well,
I'll give a plug for a friend of mine. Her name is Crystal McCreary, and she has written, Crystal has, it's a deck of cards, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's a deck of cards that teaches children how to regulate their own emotions by doing these postures. It's really beautiful. I didn't do child therapy when I was a psychologist, and I'm not going to write a children's book, but thank you for asking. Yeah. The little yogi deck. It's called the Little Yogi Deck.
The Little Yogi Deck.
Yeah, it's quite special. Yeah.
And there's a book also that's called Breathing Makes It Better. That is really good as well.
Okay.
Beverly Grant shared an affirmation, said, I created it after my son was killed in 2018. I am resilient, I am grounded, I am complete. I know the power of affirmation is true. And then other people offered some words around that. I also extend, sorry for your loss, but thank you for sharing that affirmation. Very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
See, I think I just want to comment on that, because I think that's critically important. it's hard for people to imagine that one can recover from that kind of loss. And yet, here's someone who says, you know, she's gotten through it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't still have impact, that it hasn't shaped her, and that she doesn't live with that every day. But it means that we don't have to remain stuck in the trauma. There is life beyond trauma if we're willing to do the work to get through it. Meaning facing up to the pain and suffering that we are actually experiencing. And I don't think that should ever be done alone. It doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be.
And then maybe one last question.
Yes.
Do you currently offer any virtual restorative classes?
No, I don't. What I'm doing is what I'm doing now. I'm offering, you know, I'm hoping people will buy this book and take it to heart and use it in whatever creative ways you can find to use the work. This is the art and skill of restorative yoga. And so the artistry is the creative application that you use to do the practices. So we have what, 4 minutes left. Ozzy, you said you needed time.
Just a little second.
Okay.
So we've got 50 self-care kits to give away to Denver residents that include various items like journals, candles, affirmation cards, and Dr. Parker's latest book and more. To enter the drawing for a kit, please fill out the form that is going to be linked in the chat. Please don't fill out the form unless you live in Denver. We'll also be sending up a follow-up email with links that will be open until the end, or with the link that's going to be open until end of day this Friday for winners of the kits. These kits were made by Denver Public Library's RADA group. Again, RADA stands for Read, Awareness, Dialogue, and Action. And they provide book-focused discussions and workshops in a brave space with respect and compassion to exchange experiences, understanding, and ideas that inspire social justice action in communities that Denver Public Library serves. You can find the resource that we shared above for specifically having conversations with your kids around race or with kids in general. Jen has put the link in the chat. We did record this conversation, so the link will be made, or the recording will be made available in a few days, so stay tuned for that as well. In the last 3 minutes, any last words, Dr. Parker? I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, again, thank all of you for supporting this work and for allowing me to share my practice with you. I do want to say that each of the first book, Restorative Yoga for Ethnic and Race-Based Stress and Trauma, and this current book, Transforming Ethnic and Race-Based Traumatic Stress with Yoga, each is a standalone book, but together they provide tools that you can use for yourself and those of you who are teaching others to really transform traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth. And that's what I'm really hoping that you will do and find beneficial from this work. So again, thank you for all of your support. I love you all, I do. And wish me happy birthday. My birthday is Sunday.
Do you want us to
The
sing
big
for you?
birthday. Yes, yes. I will be 76 years old, by the way, which I cannot believe, but it's true. So yes, I want to hear happy birthday.
You don't look a day over 40. If folks do want to unmute, we can unmute and sing in the last minute that we have. There's a lot of happy birthdays that are coming through the chat. I don't know how to unmute everyone, but
It's okay, you don't have to. We don't have to.
And I don't think you want just me to sing.
Oh no, I'm ready to sing.
Okay.
Okay. Let's go. You want to sing? Whoever wants to kick us off.
Happy
birthday
birthday
to
you.
Happy
birthday to you.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. This has been recorded, by the way. There you
Happy
go.
Happy birthday.
That's the one I was
to
waiting
you.
Happy birthday.
Yay.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all for attending this program. Thank you, Dr. Parker. Happy, happy, happy birthday. I hope it is beautiful, and I hope you have a wonderful time with your son and that you are filled with love and joy and rest.
Thank you.
And with
I
that, we will
received that. Yeah, thanks.
with that, we will wrap for today. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.